Hello everybody, you join me in Norfolk for my first ever drive of the legendary Mercedes G-Class, the mighty G-Wagon. This should be interesting. In fact, not only is today my first ever drive of a G-Wagon, it's actually the first time I've even sat in one, so this is all a very new experience for me. The honest truth is, I have actually really never been a fan of the G-Wagon. I think it would perhaps be unfair to say that I hate it in the same way as a Defender, but that's only because I got to drive a Defender, and that's when I really learned how little I actually cared for it. The G-Wagon has never given me the pleasure. The Defender certainly seems like a natural car to mention because I think we can all agree the two seem very closely related. They have bold utilitarian styling, they are proper off-roaders, and they've also gained fans in the most unlikely of places. You see, many people out there assume that the wealthy who want to show off will always go and buy a supercar, a Lamborghini, a Ferrari, something like that. That has certainly been true in the past, and I'm sure in certain parts of the world it still is. Today though, take yourself down to London's Mayfair, one of the most exclusive addresses in the world, and the car of choice for the glitterati is this, the G-Wagon. I would say cars like this comfortably outnumber your Lamborghinis by something like 10 to 1. In fact, around Berkeley Square, it sometimes feels as if traffic jams are entirely composed of G-Wagons. I am hoping that somebody out there can tell me where exactly this appetite for these cars came from. I'm sure a number of celebrities have been spotted driving them, but unlike the Hummer, they don't seem quite so deliberately showy. To the casual observer, they are no flashier than a Land Rover Defender, but they are an awful lot more expensive, certainly than the old Defender that still looks a little bit like this. Even weirder, there are a number of genuine car guys I know who absolutely love the G-Wagon. That includes people like Chris Harris, who actually owns one, and he says he probably shouldn't love it, but he still does. The history of the G-Wagon is certainly very interesting. It began in the 1970s when Mercedes were contracted to build a military vehicle. Work began and the car was officially released to the public in 1979. Throughout the 1980s, a number of military versions were also supplied to governments around the world. Curiously though, one place that didn't get that car was America. Though you might imagine a nice big rough and tough off-roader would do well there, Mercedes didn't want to be associated with more utilitarian stuff, instead preferring to maintain the high-class image of things like the S-Class and the SL. If sources are to be believed, and I hope someone out there can correct me if I'm wrong, that original car is still available to be purchased, granted in a modified form, but you can't simply walk into a Mercedes dealer and get one. They are contract sales to certain clients. Even so, that car had a very long life. It received a major facelift in the early 1990s, and that's when the civilian and the military versions were essentially split. Though the chassis and body wasn't really different between the two, in around 1992 the interior received a significant update, when the civilian version got essentially all of the gubbins from an S-Class, and that is when this car became a real upmarket affair, more of a rival for some to the Range Rover than the Land Rover. Unbelievably, the original civilian version G-Wagon was in production until 2018. It was built by Magna Steyr, who'd been a partner in the project from the very beginning. If you've heard the name before, that's because they're the people that build things like the Toyota Supra, the BMW Z4, and in the past, stuff like the Peugeot RCZ. It was only in 2018, 39 years after the launch of the original, that a genuinely all-new G-Wagon arrived. And this really is an all-new car, with only 3 elements carried over from the original: the cover for the spare wheel at the back, the headlight washers, and the door handles. That's it. The chassis is still very basic and utilitarian. It is a ladder chassis with a body dropped on top. It's not particularly lightweight, 2.5 tons, and there aren't all that many engines to choose from. One of the remarkable things about the last G-Wagon is that during its life it had close to 30 different powertrains available, including everything from a 4 to a 12 cylinder. For the majority of modern customers, there are only really two to choose from. Something like this, the G400D, powered by a 330 horsepower straight-six diesel, or the G63, the fire-breathing 4-litre twin-turbocharged lunatic machine. It was actually an experience with a G63 that convinced this car's owner Elliot to get one. He had bought an AMG GT, but unfortunately that car didn't actually even get him home before it broke down. So while that was being fixed, the dealership, by way of apology, said, "You can borrow anything while we're sorting your car out." He saw a G63 and said, "Those are supposed to be fun. I'd like a go in that, please." And they said, "Yes, of course." So they lent it to him, and he did have a lot of fun with it. Though he did say he realized he was never going to buy a G63 when he calculated that the fuel economy he was getting, even driving sensibly, was around 9. Not that this is spectacular. His average is 20.8, and on a run it will do better than 30, but not much better in his experience. I am told on a longer journey you can improve upon that, but still, that's not fantastic for a diesel. Numbers, though, are somewhat boring, though we'll get back to them in a little bit. This being my first proper experience of a G-Wagon, what are my thoughts? Well, first off, it is a very, very cool looking car. This one is in a colour called Emerald Green. It's a G400D Premium, which comes with a few things, none of which we're entirely sure about. I believe the command system up here has slightly bigger screens than in the base model, and you also have a Burmester stereo that's not too bad. My only real disappointment of this car is that the emerald green paint doesn't really stand out all that much. You would hope that anything called emerald would be really quite bold and vibrant, but it's not. I am pretty confident that in the vast majority of my photos it will look simply black, and truth be told, unless the sun is shining pretty hard on it, that's the way it looks to the eye as well. Ignoring that though, there are a lot of things to really like about the car. I'm not so keen on the way you get into it because the little side sill just isn't as generous as it should be. It needs to be about that much bigger, and then it would make getting into this much easier. Elliot tried to sort of feed his grandmother into the car, and it didn't go very well. They had to get a little set of steps to help her in. Once you are in though, you're greeted with what feels like a fairly high quality selection of materials. It genuinely does give you the impression of an S-Class stuffed into a Defender. The steering wheel, very nice in the hand, quite thin rimmed, very pleasing, and the weighting of it is rather impressive too. It does give you a sense of connection and of heft. You feel like you're in command of this very serious piece of kit. The quality of leather is decent. The fact you've got a sunroof up front makes at least this bit of the car feel fairly light and airy. There's wood in here too that doesn't look silly and out of place. I like it. I'm not a big fan of the infotainment system, but there's nothing unique to the G-Wagon about it. It's the same as in many other, a Mercedes-Benz and even the odd Aston Martin too. Perhaps this car's strongest feature is the visibility. Out the front, it's absolutely superb. You feel like you're perched atop the car. Because of those indicators on each corner, you can place it with absolute precision. It's maybe one of the few vehicles that's even better for that than a Range Rover. I am told that Mercedes spent untold millions trying to make sure they could keep those indicators on the corners, because to them it was a key part of the car's design, but as you might imagine, with modern day crash regulations, getting those to stay there wasn't that easy. The car also clearly has some serious off-road credentials, because here in the centre we have several diff locks available too. The only choice of gearbox is a 9-speed automatic. In the AMG they get a speed shift branded one, but I'm not sure that's really significantly different from the others. Sure, it's a little bit quicker. You can change gear yourself if you like, and it actually responds quite well. There are many driving modes available, including individual, sport, comfort, eco, and desert. For the most part, Elliot drives this car in comfort, and he says sport is best avoided for two reasons. Firstly, it doesn't really do the powertrain all that many favours. Yes, it will make it a little edgier, a little more responsive, but not by much. It's still a 2.5 ton car. Yes, it has 516 pound-feet of torque, that's 700 newton meters, but it doesn't seem that keen on deploying them right away. You'd imagine with a nice, healthy twin-turbo diesel behind it, this car will pull fairly effortlessly from low down. In fact, it's only at the top end of the rev range where it really seems to get going. That surprises me. To be perfectly honest, the gearbox and engine combo can be a little bit frustrating when you're simply trying to make decent progress, because there are so many ratios and the thing doesn't rev all that high. It feels like you've changed about 5 or 6 gears by the time you've got to 50 or 60, and that's because you have. Yes, it will eventually go up into 7th, 8th or even 9th if you're on the motorway, but the shifts are hardly seamless. You're aware of every single one, and that's annoying. The other reason to avoid sport mode is because it ruins the ride. Even in comfort, it's not exactly cosseting. It is a lot harsher than I was expecting, I have to say. The suspension has a very oddball mix of floatiness and harshness. How they manage that, I do not know. One of the things that really did impress me is the size of the tyres, not just the profile of them. Yes, they're very generous, but the width. They're 275 section all round. If you put your boot down, the car will respond reasonably briskly, not instantly, but it does a good enough job for what it is. Let's now talk about some of the things that I don't like about this car. Trying to manoeuvre it is not easy. The turning circle is pretty awful. This is not exactly unique to the G-Wagon. The visibility, though ahead is very good, to the side is somewhat odd because you have this B-pillar right here. However, at junctions like this, you tend to find yourself looking at the rear window, which isn't all that far away. One of this car's biggest issues though, and one I certainly did not expect, is the interior space. I just imagined that it would have loads of it because take a look at it and it seems to be a fairly big car. The boot is decent enough, maybe not quite as capacious as you'd hope, but you can get plenty of stuff in there and it's tall if nothing else. So for airport runs and the like, it'll do absolutely fine. However, rear seat space is compromised. I can get myself behind myself just about, but it's not comfortable. It's not enjoyable. I am also somewhat confused as to why they chose to put in one of their flagship cars, their biggest sellers, the infotainment from the old S-Class. This is all now very, very out of date. Even an A45 has a better system. If this were a 5-year-old example, I would entirely forgive it because that was then fairly current. But it's not. This is brand new. And then the killer blow, the price. I deliberately didn't look up what one of these was going for because I knew the prices would be silly regardless. The car market is just very strange. However, I expected the list price of something like this to be in the order of sort of, 70, 80, perhaps up to about £90,000. That will put it in line with the new Defender, which is a genuinely all-new car, much like this, though it is one that is a little bit more advanced in terms of chassis and the like. Now, this list price, £120,000. I knew that you could buy these for that kind of money, but I just assumed that that was going to be the G63. I had no idea the G400 was quite that much money. Now, okay, because this is a G-Wagon, it's fairly new, they're in demand, supply is short, Elliot could actually sell this car and turn a profit. But there's no getting away from that list price. That's what Mercedes feel one of these is worth. And in the last year, the price has risen by about 10,000 quid, owing allegedly to chip shortage issues and the like. I think the real reason there is Mercedes can just charge a little bit more. Oh, the brakes there are a little bit grabby, wasn't expecting that. It also did some weird stuff with the chassis there, kind of shuddered about as I had half the wheels on the sand there and half on the road. Very odd. Granted, it does feel like the sort of car where if I wanted to, I could just turn right and get to where I need to go over there. But let's be honest, very few people actually use it for that kind of stuff. Nearly nobody is going to use it for its genuine off-road credentials, and it certainly has some. I'm sure, well equipped, this is a proper off-roader. But I must confess, though it certainly is entertaining, and I kind of get why people might buy one, it looks cool, drives really quite nice, the steering is lovely, I still don't like it. If for no other reason than now I know just how bad the G63 is on fuel, I'm even more annoyed at people having a go at supercar owners for killing the planet, and not people who buy these to drive around London. I mean, if you want an actual value for money car, just get an S-Class, because you're going to get a lot more car for less money. It's as simple as that, there's no two ways about it. I think maybe my feelings on the G-Wagon can best be summarised by this door, and the one at the back, which on the inside is just covered in really nasty, cheap, scratchy plastic. One of the things I hated about a Defender is that though it looks big and rough and tough and sturdy, it actually felt incredibly flimsy. The best example of that being the doors. They never ever want to shut properly, and this is the same. That door's not shut. It sounded like it shut, didn't it? That's what you've got to do to shut it. I'm sure some people love the idea you have to do that to shut the door. Makes you feel like a man. Urgh. But if I'm buying a £120,000 luxury car, I don't want to have to sit in a car park doing that. And apparently the people that buy these presumably don't care because they've got a G-Wagon, therefore they're better than you. Maybe I'm just miserable all the time. Anyway, that is my first experience of a Mercedes-Benz G-Class. A huge thank you to Elliot for bringing his car out. As ever, to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and even if you have, make sure you've checked the bell icon so you'll be notified of every single new video release. And I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.